The Association of Black Foundation Executives held a meeting at the annual Council on Foundations gathering in Philadelphia. People flocked to the city of brotherly love to hear from author and Washington Post associate editor and columnist Eugene Robinson. They also came to hear from one of the founding members of ABFE, Ambassador James A. Joseph. Unbeknownst to Mr. Joseph, other founding members came from across the world to surprise him at that gathering.
Yes, sure. Hello, how are you? Very pleased to meet you.
And Jim, these people wanted to talk to you for a minute.
For he's a jolly good brother, for he's a jolly good brother, for he's a jolly good brother, when nobody can deny, nobody can deny, when nobody can deny.
The event took place during the organization's 40th year, giving a rare but welcomed opportunity to hear from those who were recognized for the birth of ABFE.
Stokely Carmichael, on his notable walk with Martin Luther King, shouted "Black Power," and that resonated across all levels of society, from civil rights organizations to nonprofit organizations to governmental organizations to philanthropic organizations. The importance of having blacks in some control of their own destiny was a very compelling idea.
We were young and impassioned, the way a lot of young people, I hopefully still are. And there were two things that brought us together. One, we wanted to know one another. There were very, very few blacks in philanthropy at the time. And our first goal really was to try to identify who we were and how many we were, just so we could come together as a group and reinforce what we were trying to do. That's number one. Number two, we wanted to affect philanthropy. Much of philanthropy at the time was run by either lawyers who were the executors of estates or people's wives or daughters. It was really not the profession that it is today. And so we, as a group of younger African-American people, we are concerned about our communities, and we wanted to have a greater impact on our communities and the organization that ran all of the foundations.
So, as we began to share our work and our issues and our concerns about foundation work and about blacks and foundations, it was evident that the first place that needed some attention was organized philanthropy in the United States, that is, the Council on Foundations.
Some of you have heard we were in Montreal at the Council on Foundations meeting, and we had Roland was there, Ernie was there, Ron was there, Jim and me, and one other person, Carl McCall. And we had taken the time to understand that the bylaws of the Council did allow for nominations from the floor. And so the night before, with a whole lot of wine and probably some other liquor, we sat there for a very long time, deciding our strategy for this meeting that was going to, membership meeting that was going to be held the next morning. We decided on who we were going to nominate, and we tottered off to bed about 2 or 3. And at 6 o'clock, I called all these gentlemen, because I was the only woman at the time. I called, "Get up, damn it, we got to go." And we did. And when the person said, "Are there any nominations?" Oh, when we sat forward. So that made a lot of people nervous. Anyway, here was a group of black people sitting toward the front. I don't know who we nominated. Jim, probably. Was it Jim? Yeah. But anyway, when they called nominations from the floor, hand went up, and the room got silent. And we nominated African-American members to the Council on Foundation. Thank you.
I think many of the reasons for which we formed ABFE still exist, unfortunately. One could look around any meeting of foundation executives and see how different it is now compared to when I went to my first meeting and there was only one other black present, and it was the annual conference of the council. And however, what we've had is that people have allowed more of us in to share a communal space, but our interest was in sharing communal power. And so diversity, which meant that you got to sit in the room, but you didn't get to sit around the table, was the kind of diversity we attacked. And I think ABFE still needs to do that.
ABFE for me has been an amazing network of professional advisors, colleagues, and friends. I currently serve on the board of directors as the chair of the governance committee. But before that, I was a fellow in the Connecting Leaders Fellowship Program, and that experience really helped position me within my organization and to some extent in the broader field to really take advantage of leadership opportunities.
It's benefited me by giving me a network of people who have some shared values. It's given me access to some colleagues that I could seek out for advice. It's given me a chance to influence some of the young Turks that are coming, both male and female, that are coming in to the philanthropic world, and has given me an opportunity to connect the work that I'm trying to do to strengthen black communities, not only in my philanthropic work, i.e. my job, but in my personal life as well. So it's given me a point of reference.
It was through the networking, the learning, and the collegiality that I really became attached to the organization, and that was in the early 1990s. And I was not in one of the large cities in the East or in the Midwest or West. I was in the South. So we didn't have very many staffed foundations in our area, and even fewer black staff at those foundations. So the relationships that I was able to build with these people who were experienced in the field and who were also black and cared about me was very important.
ABFE is a training ground to understand from others who went before you. I had the benefit of learning and interacting directly with Jim Joseph, with Lynn Huntley, with Carol Perry, with a number of those early African American leaders that I got a chance to sort of sit, ask questions, observe how they did things so that I was coached. I didn't get to being the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation for 13 years, now CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, a $2 billion enterprise, out of luck. I got there because I was coached by people through those ABFE social gatherings to think, to prepare, to understand the responsibilities of leadership. And I think that sometimes gets underplayed because it's less tangible, it's less real, you can't feel it. It happens in those late meetings, it happens in the hospitality suite, it happens when Hugh Burroughs puts his arms around you and says, look, this is what you have to remember as you're going through this process. This is what you have to get better at. Those are the settings where you get the mentoring. It's not formalized, it's the informal mentoring that was very valuable to my success and career.
The highlight of the evening was the James A. Joseph Lecture Series and Award Ceremony, where the lecturer was none other than the man who the series is named after.
I hope that you will not let anyone persuade you that organizations with your mission are divisive, that this is a post-racial society, and that collaboration is the only strategy. Of course you need to collaborate, to develop and deploy allies who share your values as well as your sense of urgency. Confrontation may be on the back burner, but it cannot be relegated to the dustbin of history. I like to say that while I have been privileged to participate in presidential cabinet meetings and corporate boardrooms, I still reserve the right to return to the streets when and if that seems necessary.
We ask people to share their views on the relevancy and challenges of ABFE for the next 40 years.
I think that what you
what they have to do is that, I mean, we were young at that time also, but we saw something was wrong and felt that it was something that had to be righted. And so we set out with the course of action. And I think that by everyone working together and towards some common goals, we were able to do it and had to resolve and you did have support from each other, and that's important. So that network, I think, is very key.
I care profoundly about the lives and the conditions of black people. And all of my career I've spent trying to bring equity, fairness, and justice to to communities of color, but especially African Americans. And I think we're sliding back fast. And I want to see these young people. I want to eyeball them. I want to see how they feel about their jobs. I want to see how they feel about philanthropy, and try to help them identify where they can make a difference. And and mostly I want to encourage them to be bold. This is not the time for the faint of heart. This is not the time for people to, be concerned about if I say something, my board of directors might get bent out of shape. We got to stand up and speak up. And if we can't do that, then we can't really have the effect we need to have on our communities.
I think that the challenge for the next 40 years will be for ABFE to embrace not just institutional givers or foundations, but all kinds of donors who give to the black community, who are black and who give. I think figuring out ways to do that and do it effectively and support the work of donors who give to enhance the black community is very important. And I have to put the emphasis on working with black donors to the black community.
There's a need to nurture black people of means to create their own giving entities. There needs to be an effort to harness a lot of blacks who do have means, so that rather than just having a lot of very small foundations, for example, a lot of athletes have foundations, a lot of movie celebrities have, a lot of business people. How do we bring those resources together in a way that leverages those resources and also can challenge and demand additional resources, whether it be from government or whether it be from major foundations?
We've got to be more strategic to understand that everybody can't make it here. And so we've got to go to these other groups, these pockets where there are African Americans who would love to be involved in ABFE. We've got to make it easier for them. We've got to maximize using social media today. We need to be on the cutting edge of Twitter and Facebook, where we can in real time share experiences, talk about issues, and not make it so far in between. The idea that we really only gather at an annual meeting is almost passé today. In real time, we ought to be using these new vehicles to gather more people, to engage more people, and I think that's the future of what ABFE has to do.
Beyond. I think that, well, certainly what we heard in Ambassador Joseph's lecture tonight, in terms of making sure that as black executives in philanthropy, that you understand you have an obligation. You have an obligation to the African American community. And I am hopeful that going forward, that even though ABFE has really joined with other minority organizations, that it still remains at its core an advocate for African American causes and as a support base for those of them who remain in philanthropy.
Some might say it's a post-racial society, but when you peel back the conversation beyond race and explore issues of equity and fairness, there's still tons of work to do. And so for ABFE and for black folks in general, continuing to push our communities into places of focus and our issues into the forefront of conversations around equity and fairness and access, because we have made huge gains. There is no doubt, but there's lots of work to do.
If we ever
as black people especially, needed a strong organization to focus our attention on our community, it is right now. So I encourage you when you leave this meeting to get in touch with your colleagues when you go back home and try to have regional or state meetings and try to come up with an organizational agenda. Maybe you were going to ask that question, where you've decided, this doesn't mean you can't focus on the things that your foundation specifies, but that as an organization, you look at those issues of highest need in our community and try to see how some collective could really begin addressing some